Good morning, and thanks for asking me. It's really great, as always, to be in Sydney. Now, Mark and I have got a competition to see how many slides we can show between us, so I'm going to crack on and we'll get into what I want to talk about today. And that's really about our experience of regeneration at Bankside, and in particular what we've done with the power station there that many of you will have been to. Not Battersea, which everyone thinks when they think power stations in London, but Bankside, and making the most of what that can do for the wider area. So it's not just about the building itself. Now, we're 20 years into this project, so maybe 20 years from where you are now. And I think there are a lot of similarities to White Bay. The context is very similar. And I don't think the solution is going to be exactly the same, of course not. But what a fantastic opportunity with this building. But I do think there is a role for culture, certainly in the precinct, and most possibly as part of the power station or its surrounds. So I think the approach I'm going to talk to you about, which is our sort of, we call it the social model, has some merit when we're looking about cultural regeneration and industrial buildings. So here's the situation in 1995. Power station, mainly disused. There was still some switch going on in the power station, but it's been pretty much derelict and fenced off for over 20 years. Again, the same as here. It's in the centre of London. It's facing the City of London, but it's actually in a completely lost part of the city. So it's facing the City of London, the square mile, until recently one of the most wealthiest places in the world, but a sort of forgotten part of the city used to support Fleet Street and the paper industries, but on the wane. Dominated by railway arches and connected to the south to some of the most diverse and also some of the most deprived communities in London. So it was similar, I think it's similar to White Bay in that way, that it's a connector between the city and between the communities to the south, or in this case in Balmain and Rozelle and wider into Leichhardt. So it's got a quite important position between the city and the communities. So we set out to convert this building in the mid-90s to the UK's first museum of modern and contemporary art. And I'm not going to go too heavy into the theory, but I think we have a three-pronged approach to the project. We're working in economic, social, and cultural spheres. We're working in local, national, and international contexts. That's what we're trying to create with the project. And we're developing 4 critical assets: culture, community, business, and placemaking. And I think another constant narrative has been political ownership and involvement. You cannot do projects like this unless you've got buy-in and ownership from the politicians. And to that end, the first £1 million that went into this project actually came from the London Borough of Southwark, the local borough, and there was a big dispute at the time about whether industry and proper jobs was the solution rather than this sort of wishy-washy cultural activity. So it was quite a brave political move to take in the 90s to invest in that. And the first project, £135 million, it wouldn't happen today, but 50% public funding, 50% private funding. So in the late 1990s, we began the transformation of the power station. We wanted to retain the building, retain the heritage asset, but we had to make it into fit for purpose for a museum. So you can see here, involved taking the roof off, converting the space for gallery, raising the roof, major engineering project, and clearing the land around, which was quite toxic, some of the land. I don't know if you have the similar, I haven't heard that mentioned about White Bay, but it may be an issue. So we opened in 2000. I'll let you read all those statistics. Britain's first museum of modern art, designed and planned, and it's a huge building for those of you being, for 1.8 million visitors. Consistently, we've had 5 million visitors since the day we opened. So it was double the visitors that we designed it for. And the central space, I think, that's been one of the defining spaces of the museum has been the Turbine Hall, and it's 3,300 square meters. It was filled with the machinery, the turbines from the power station. And we cleared it and have made it this central part of the museum. And it's a funny space. It's not quite in the city, it's not quite in the museum. It's a sort of collision. It's an interstitial space between the city and the museum. And each year we commission an artist to make use of the space. It's an incredible space. And this was Olafur Eliasson. It's called the Weather Project, the giant sun, as the public called it. And 3 million people came to see this exhibition. It was a destination. It's free from all over the country. And you'll have heard many impressive economic stats that, over the last couple of days. Well, here's my bid for that. On the last weekend that this exhibition was open, more people came to see it that went to Bluewater. Now, Bluewater is the biggest shopping mall in the south of England. So maybe for one weekend only, culture beats shopping. And that's my killer stat, I'll tell you. And that allows us to, to display very large works of art. This is Louise's Bourgeois Spider. We have a huge education program, 400,000 people a year from 4 to 84 coming and getting involved in discussions and learning at the museum. So it's a resource for the community, but actually for the whole country. And we've extended the use of art into the public realm. This one isn't read, Charles, but I do agree with you about huge numbers of public art being read. And from the start, before we even started, the first post that we appointed when it was at this stage was a community development officer. It wasn't a curator, it wasn't an artistic director. The first post in the project was the forerunner of the sort of work I do, which was to make a series of partnerships and dialogues with the community about how that building could be used with them, how the facilities could be used, and also how they could get involved in the programme. And that's continued to this day. It's a place of dialogue and involvement with the community. And this is a great example because this is a local knitting group who we got in contact with, and we said, how can we work with you? How can we work with the museum? And they said, we want to have our knitting group in the gallery. So we said, okay, well, Damien Hirst separated from the flock. That's quite an interesting work for knitting, isn't it? So we brought them in, and they brought their little homage to Damien. You can see in front of the... In fact, I don't show the curators this picture, by the way. I'll be in trouble. And they did their knitting class. And the visitors didn't know, is this a contemporary art installation? What's going on here? But, it's partly about ownership of the building, ownership of the institution for the people who come and use it. And we're using the building itself as a canvas for art, and it's a sort of signal that we want to work. We're not just about the building. We want to work and explore creativity in the wider community. And this was an interesting one, by the way. What's that man holding? Just shout, someone. A gun. Of course, it does. Everyone thinks it's a gun. It's actually a video camera. So it's seeing you make an assumption and then countering it. But of course, everyone thought it was a gun. Now, the community that the museum exists in has had a lot of trouble with gangs over the years. The day that went up, I had the head of gun crime on the phone to me going, you've just put a black man on the entrance to our community saying, with a gun. Yeah. And it took me about 2 days to convince him, actually, it was a gun. But, we don't just see the building as the beginning and the end of what we do. And I think for those of you who were here yesterday, I'm also, as a non-exec, involved with Borough Market. It's a bit like Whitebait and the fish market. There's, within a mile of each other, there is the Tate, and this amazing market that's been there for 1,000 years. And at the same time that Tate took shape, the market was reinvented from an old-fashioned wholesale market to a new type of primary producer market, which really caught the sort of zeitgeist and attracted millions of people. So what you're seeing here is, I think, a form of regeneration that was beginning and being driven by culture and by food. Well, they're both culture, aren't they? So here we are, 2000. The museum opens, as I said to you, 5 million visitors coming to Tate, twice as many as we expected, 6 million people coming to the market, culture and food driving the regeneration, and also transport, of course, incredibly important. We had a good transport in central London, but the Millennium Bridge, the wobbly bridge, coming in at the same time as Tate was actually an absolutely crucial infrastructure project. 3 other things start to happen now. We also start to see the emergence of a cultural quarter. So within the vicinity of Tate, within a couple of miles, there came 22 not-for-profit cultural organisations. A lot of them throughout their whole history hadn't really worked together. Theatre, dance, music, performing arts had seen themselves in silos in opposition. Mainly with the Olympics coming, we started to see that there was a commonality, and the organisations started to work together around education, around the Olympics, and around the public realm, starting to think of the cityscape as a canvas. And of course, by coming together, we have quite a big economic impact, you can see from those statistics. So we started to try and speak as a voice for culture in that part of London, and for the reach we could have, not just with our immediate visitors, but the economic impact, the jobs we drive in London. So it was a natural progression about thinking of the wider area, not just the building. And the third thing that begins to happen is that there was business in the area, but as it starts to become more attractive, business is attracted, and we ended up doubling and trebling and more the number of businesses and people that are coming to work in the area. And our solution to that, and Jackie is on the panel, was very instrumental in that in London, was that we created one of the first business improvement districts, Better Bankside, to recognise the changing nature of the area and the pressure that was becoming as seen here. So 12 million people are starting to use the linear path along the Thames, where 15 years before, if you met 2 men and a dog, you would have been lucky. That's a massive amount of change, and it causes crowding, litter, illegal trading, busking, disturbance, particularly to the local people who live there. So the bid seemed to be the answer, and helps us also to make it a good area to attract new business. It's community wardens, it's litter cleaning, it's funded and run by the businesses. They pay an extra percentage onto their tax, so 1.2 million business a year, and it doesn't replace what local authorities and councils do. It adds value, and it recognises that the impact on a business district is much more, say, than on a neighbourhood. And the fourth element has been placemaking, and it'll be good because there's a couple of architects on the panel to have this discussion later on. But what we've done here is we've developed a thing called the Bankside Urban Forest. And it's not a literal forest, but it's a metaphorical forest. And I'm a bit suspicious of old-fashioned monolithic master planning. It tends to be done by great men usually, and tends to set out this grand vision with usually costing millions and millions of pounds. I think master planning needs new iterations and new evolution in city making, and this is what we're trying to do. So we look at the area like a forest. We look at a set of values, a set of principles that people can accrete to, whether they're building a major road scheme or whether they're putting a window box on their apartment. So it's been a new approach, and it's been incredibly successful. It's got strong design aspirations. Don't mistake that. We really want to make the most of the public realm, keeping the heritage, making the connections, but we want it to be inclusive for the new and for the heritage and for the rich people who are coming to live here, as well as the people not so rich who've lived here for a long time. And one of the things it's really trying to do is bring away this concentration from the river. So we're trying to create east-west routes across London and move to the south, as I said, where the big communities are and where there are other major areas of regeneration. So we're always looking to see if we can spread the load and the advantages that come with the success of a place like the Tate. Here's a few examples. They're just very slight. This was one of the first ones that we did. There's a heritage medieval street pattern all around this part of London. We don't want to ruin that. We want to keep that uniqueness, but it's a bit difficult to navigate. So this was the first iteration. It's not the yellow brick road, it's follow the orange lampposts, which you can see there. So using the street furniture in a distinct way to link you to major travel points and to link you through the area and give you confidence to go away other than just walking along the river. I think I said to you earlier on, railway arches sort of dominate the area. They can be dirty, they've had pigeons, they've been dark. So we've had a whole set of projects working with the railway actually to think about how we use those railway arches, and again really involving local stakeholders in how the area changes. And that's been everything from lighting projects just to make the place more manageable but not taking away that sort of lovely sculptural feel of the arches, and then commissioning public art, also not red, by the way. This is the longest piece of public art in London, Ian Davenport. It's under one of the main railway arches, and it gives you a little bit of a sense you're coming into a neighbourhood that's got creativity in it. It's a place where something a little bit different is happening. And revamping smaller spaces that had sort of either become very run down or in this case been taken over by street drinkers. And again, working just to create a new sort of permeable space, a place of congregation in the area, which takes some of the pressure away from the main tourist routes, and, and in so doing actually stimulated business coming in. Around this square, before the scheme, half of it was occupied by business. Now small businesses, a jazz club actually, has come in to work here. And the narrative throughout everything that we do, and again that will be one here, I'm absolutely sure, is about employment, looking for ways for people in the city to get employment in the cultural quarter, in the cultural institutions and in the businesses. And we've set up brokerage models to do that. So it's not just about putting an advert in the Herald. It's about pre-employment, it's about familiarization, it's about giving people the chance to find out about these sort of industries and then get a chance to work in them. So for instance, in Tate, about 50% of our front of house staff come from within 2 miles of the museum, and in the shop it's about 80 or 90%. So it's good business practice. It's not just some sort of social program. And a whole number of pop-ups and what everyone refers to yesterday as meanwhile spaces on development sites. This is an urban orchard, and there isn't a swimming pool. This is a pop-up on a development site we did with architects, which actually is a swimming pool. And you know, the one thing I would say about what was said yesterday is, for me, meanwhile is always. There's always the chance for meanwhile. In any stage of a development and evolution, you're always looking to do the different, to look at spaces in different ways, to look at the streetscape. So meanwhile's forever, as far as I'm concerned. And somebody was telling me the other day in White Bay in the old days, it sounds a bit dangerous, children used to bathe under the wastewater as it came out. So I thought that was quite, we had children in slightly safer water perhaps. And the one thing I would just say about this is, this all seems really nice, and the developer on this site has, because of these pop-ups, has decided to build a bath facility into the development that will be available to local people as well as to the residents who come in to buy the apartments. Now, it doesn't happen often, but you can influence development by these sort of talks and by these sort of dialogues and by looking at things in a slightly different way. It's a small victory, but it's something, you know. And very much about putting public art and dialogue into the community. And we always say we're the only business improvement district in the world that encourages people to write on the wall, because most of them spend their time cleaning graffiti off the wall. So this is a Candy Chang work, Before I Die. Pop-up spaces, again, this is Tate, but this is a construction site. You'd usually hoard it. What we've done, created a pocket park, commissioned a sculpture which is permeable, so you can see into the construction site and the construction site can see out. It's exploring this dialogue of public institutions, public body, and people being able to see what's going on with their money and in their organisations. So here we are, 2014, 20 years on. The residential population has doubled. The workers is almost tenfold, from 6,000 to 60,000 workers. We've had major infrastructure projects. So in a relatively small part of London, you see the dynamic that's happened over 20 years. And of course, because it's in central London, makes it different. But there's no doubt that the culture has driven a lot of this. Again, at Borough Market, major changes over the last few years. David mentioned it yesterday in the market session. They've had a whole railway viaduct built right through the market. But what that's allowed us to do is revamp and recog what we're doing at the market. And, you know, we've got all these newcomers like the Shard coming in, Johnny-come-latelys to the area. But the market's been there for 1,000 years. It's at the centre of the community. And we've used this redevelopment to reinforce that, to create better places for growing, for shopping, for education, and building on that reputation. So both of the key cultural anchors, we're continuing to try and reassert our position in the community. So we're now moving into the fourth phase, which is over the next 5 to 10 years, and you can see the stats there. The biggest one to say is £5 to £10 billion of construction over the next 10 years. In the time that there's been people living in that area for over 1,000 years, this next period will see as much development as in the whole of the history of the neighbourhood before. So that's major challenges coming out of that. And Tate's in the middle of that. What we're trying to do with our next stage, and I'll show you the building, is from a museum that faced the river, we're opening up both physically and philosophically to the south. So we're trying to look at how we move the people and the philosophy of what we're trying to do further into the south of London, to wider communities, and to continue this sort of narrative of regeneration of the area. And we'll come back to this in the discussion. And this is the building by Herzog de Moor, and it's a modern building, but it still has a brick facade to reassert amongst the glass towers of the city that this is a different space, it's a different building, it's a beacon within the city. And also there is still a small operational switch station here generating electricity, or switching it, and it's created a lot of interesting environmental opportunities for us. And I know environmental energy is a big discussion topic about the use of white paint, and we should come back to that later on. And it gives you all the things you would expect: a lot more gallery space, more social space. We're increasing the activity that we can do as a museum, but we're also increasing our social spaces. And the big urban realm project we're starting on now is a thing called the Low Line. Now, you'll all have heard of the High Line in New York, where they've renovated the railway. Well, the railway arches in Southwark, which have always been such a burden to us, are now the opportunity. So we're working with Network Rail to create a linear path of 2 miles between the two major stations, London Bridge and Waterloo, and to animate that at ground level, to convert all these derelict arches for small business, for cultural use, for cafes, and for other businesses, and creating a green corridor, a cycle path along it. It's a very ambitious project. If we get it right, it could be as significant for London as the High Line has been for New York. I just wanted to finish with 3 examples, and luckily, no one, apart from one, no one's really covered these yesterday, of what I think are very interesting approaches to industrial sites and changes within the city, just for you to think about. Now, the first one is the Emsmeer Lange Park in the Rhine. Some of you may have been there. At one time, the most industrialized place in the world, the amount of industry that was going there. And they've taken, about 4 cities have taken a really interesting approach to that. Much of it's gone, but they've also converted a huge amount of the industrial heritage into opera houses, into galleries, into climbing parks, into a whole host of activities. So the industry still dominates the landscape, but it's used in a completely different way by the community and by tourists. And this is a classic example, the gasometer in Oberhausen, which dominated, dominated the area. Instead of decommissioning it and just pulling it down, they've converted it as a visitor experience. It's wrapped by crystal. The artist is amazing inside, and you can go up in an elevator. And it's just a good example of how you can recycle and remake heritage in a way that can include lots and lots of people. Tempelhof Airport in Berlin, most famous for, of course, the Berlin airlift in the Cold War, which sort of saved West Berlin, where Kennedy went, has been converted in 2010 into an urban park, into a leisure facility, an amenity for Berliners. And this year, the city, change in major land use in Germany has to go to ballot. The city was balloted on whether a part of this land should be developed for housing. And in a city of, I think, 2.5 million people eligible to vote, over 1 million voted, and 65% voted to keep the park as it was, as an amenity for the city. So, I mean, that's quite a powerful example of developing a facility and people owning it. And the last one is, Medellin in Colombia, most famous for Pablo Escobar, cocaine, and being shot if you walk anywhere on the street. Well, I think this is an unbelievable project, and I don't think it's relevant for White Bay, but I just wanted to show you. And it's using escalators to connect the favelas on the hillside to the city and to the amenities. So it's a brilliant example of how you can take away some of the real difficulties of living up on a mountain in a city and having to transport goods and your shopping and of these things, and it's covered. And what they've done really cleverly is, because there is still some danger in these communities, at the interpoints they've built libraries, the government, and those are, of course, libraries that you'd use, but they're also safe spaces, social spaces. They're the glue between the infrastructure, and I think it's a really clever project. You don't have to necessarily move people from slums. They're very well organized. You have to make it better. And of course it's covered for the weather. And I think I had one there. It just allows people, say older people, to be able to get home. So that's it. 48 seconds, that's quite good. So that's just a sort of quick glimpse of some of the things we're doing. I hope you see some parallels for what might happen here, and it'll help with the discussion. As I say, we're 20 years in. It's a voyage of discovery and change. I've been there 14 years, and the reason I've been there 14 years is that things change all the time. We're discovering new ways of doing things, new dialogues, and it's a bit, to paraphrase Joseph Beuys, the artist, it's lots of small brushstrokes that make a painting or that make something complete. It comes incrementally, it comes in small parts when you're neighborhood and community building in Regeneration. And most of all, I think it's about dialogue and it's about partnership. And I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.